My name is Riley. I'm an addict. And our guest today, as Patrick said, is Paul Hedderman. The story of Paul, the action figure, as Paul likes to say, includes multiple drug addictions over multiple years, which resulted in several trips to hospitals and jails and institutions. Today, Paul has more than 30 years of sobriety. He's written multiple books, and he has become one of the leading voices in the message of non-duality. Paul has a website, www.zenbitchslap.com, where you can find links to his weekly Zoom meetings, as well as many more fantastic resources to dive deeper into non-duality, which is what we will be discussing today. I wanted to start off with a reading today. I'm going to share my screen here. It felt apropos for what we are talking about. Paul, give me 1 second here. So this is a reading from Drop the Rock. It's a short reading. It reads, it's from Joe McHugh. It's called Stripping Away. It reads, I have a pretty rocking chair down in my office. When I first brought the building, someone had run off and left the chair behind. There wasn't anything else there of any value, but there was this old rocking chair. It was just a horrible looking mess, painted black with one of the rungs broken out of the back of it. I decided I'd keep it, thinking maybe one of these days I might put it back together. Quite a few years went by and it just sat in the attic. Several times, some of the guys tempted me to throw it away. In fact, I'd find it around by the dumpster and I'd bring it back saying I was going to look at it one of these days. I finally got this old rocking chair out of the attic and into the light downstairs so I could really see it. And as I began to look at it, I saw that it was really a fine chair. I got some paint stripper and I began to strip it back. I stripped all the paint away and found that it was solid oak. I took the old raggedy bottom that had been covered over many, many times with different cloths and tacks, and I tore it off and threw it away. There was one broken rung, and I made an identical one by bending one and putting it in there. I sanded and refinished this chair. Finally, I took it to the upholstery shop. I asked the man there how much it would cost to put a nice white velvet bottom in it. He looked at it and said, I'd be glad to put it in there, but before I fix it, I'll offer you $350 for that chair. That beautiful, valuable chair was always there. It was there all the time. It was simply covered up. That chair has always been beautiful since the day the furniture maker made it. And that's the way I am and you are with God's life inside us. God made us this way, beautiful and valuable. Like the rocking chair, over a period of years, I covered myself up with all sorts of things and made a big mess. The steps of this program have enabled me to uncover, discover, and discard. It's a program of getting rid of things to get down to what we want. It's not a program of getting anything. It's a program of getting rid of things, uncovering, discovering, and discarding. So, Paul, that reading always hit me between the eyes, and it felt, as I said, apropos for our discussion today. I wonder if you could just pick up the baton from there and talk about the process, what that was like for you of stripping away.
Well, I got struck sober March 21st, 1988. It was a regular day at the office. I was just trying to stay loaded until I went to another institution, jail or death. I came out of a blackout, which was sort of like parachuting behind enemy lines. You come out into a situation you haven't seemed to have been there, but everyone there hasn't missed you at all. And I was sitting with a guy who I didn't know, drinking a bottle of Royal Gate vodka. And I looked at him, and he had a big head and a bulbous nose and a varicose veins. And I said to myself, this guy's a bum. And lo and behold, he was looking at me from my view as I was a bum. And at that moment, the head stopped, which I didn't think was possible. The screen went blank, and then it came back with like a CNN news headline, which was, I'm fucked, yeah, which was actually the case I was in, but there was a lot of denial around that. And right underneath that, and I'm not managerial quality. That little whack set off a train of circumstances that brought me to my first meeting that night of AA, and I've been going ever since. So I didn't get sober in AA, but I've stayed sober in AA. And this is, I feel, that getting whacked would have died on the vine unless I was introduced to a way of life, which I was through recovery. So, yeah, to me, I don't feel it's a spiritual malady. I don't believe spirit has a malady. I think it's a diminishing of the mental state is basically the condition that the recovery program provides, which is shifting a basis from trusting finite self into trusting the infinite. Yeah. So the process just reinforces that. And the big pivoting, there's a lot of them, but one of the big pivotings in the book for me is we lose interest in self, and then it starts talking about everything else that happens. So the extreme interest in self to me is the addiction, the mental addiction to this idea of being a someone, a body, a doer, a thinker, a feeler, a taster, a toucher, a winner, a loser, whatever, being the alpha and the omega. That obsession, that addiction, we lose interest in. We lose interest in the drug we're addicted to, which is self. Yeah. And when we do that, all these kind of remarkable things start to follow. But it pivots on that loss of interest. And then in our community, there's a lot of warnings about things. And one of the greatest warnings is self can't get out of self. It explains a lot of the frustration that many people are in because they're still trying to get out of self as self. Yeah, they're in the act of being identified as self, and therefore their solution becomes another form of bondage in a way. So this is so I don't think I don't believe it's an uncovering of anything. I believe it's a shift of interest, really. So the unsuspected inner resource is unsuspected because we're extremely interested in the head. When we lose interest in the head, that unsuspected resource becomes suspected, yes, but not by the head. See, this is the point. Yeah. So there's a loss of interest in the head, and then that interest goes other places and discovers that which has never not been there. Yes. And therefore, your new basis starts getting established. We go through the working steps to produce a stabilization of that condition, because obviously, if life was ours, we could have just ended the program at step 3. We could have just turned our will and life over to the care of a higher power. But obviously, we're occupied at that point by something that's playing a higher power. So we have to make a decision and then do the working steps to loosen that grip of the lower power. Yeah. So I don't believe there's a spiritual malady. I believe there's just an extreme interest in the mental conditions. Yeah. Yeah.
I've heard you speak about the, sorry to interrupt, the that night of being thoroughly convinced. And I wonder if you could expand upon that a little bit. You mentioned the managerial, you're not managerial quality. I love that segue into the first step and the wording of the first step. What was it that you felt in that moment that had a different quality or clarity? What were you thoroughly convinced of?
First, emptiness, which is actually quite full, and then the recognition of all the failure of what I was relying on. Yeah. So basically, I got whacked. And when I came back out of that whack, I had come to my senses concerning 2 facts in my life that I was avoiding at all costs. And 2 of them was I'm an alcoholic and I'm not managerial quality. Yeah. Those 2 things that I was always wrestling with and losing. And when I got into agreement with those things, that those things are now and have been and will be a fact, things started to go a lot better. Yes. So I believe in surrender, but I believe surrender can end into a state of surrendered where you're convinced of certain things and there's no unconvincing of that. Yeah. Yeah. So I have never had a debate every year it doesn't come up for debate about my managerial quality or my powerlessness over alcohol and drugs. Never. There's no debate. There's no, there's no time lapse. Well, now I'm ready to manage. It's just been a done deal. Yeah, which I feel is a part of the basis. The basis is always there. Our condition sometimes has to change a lot to allow that basis to be influential. Yeah. So I think that's what the program does. But I believe the first addiction is the mental state's addiction to self, the idea of self. And I see self as foreign to us. Yeah. And I feel page 64 describes it perfectly. Being convinced self. And there's the word being convinced. That's actually a state. Yeah. A present state. Being convinced self, manifested in various ways, is what has defeated us. We will now look at its common manifestations. And then the next paragraph starts with the word resentment. Now, the way I was taught to do an inventory was to look at my resentments, my fear, my acting out in the pursuit of what I wanted. And I've come to believe that's not the clear direction. I follow the direction on page 64, which is we're going to look at self's manifestations in our life. And we have been defeated by self's manifestations, not our manifestations. Yes? So I'm a big believer to drop the word my before a lot of shit, like my resentment, my fear, my harms done to others, because I feel you're in the act of being identified as self if you call self's manifestations yours. And that to me is the exact nature of the wrong.
You segued beautifully into what I wanted to talk about. That passage in the big book, I've heard you highlight it a number of times. Relating it back to your own experience prior to finding this solution, these manifestations of self, can you talk about why that smacked you in between the eyes so hard and link it back to your own experience and addiction?
Well, the thing is, it was around 6th or 7th year of recovery. I had the privilege of leading a lot of fourth-step workshops. And so I was looking at how it works all the time. And then one night I was reading page 64 and I read that sentence, being convinced, which I understood because I felt I had been brought into that condition, suddenly being convinced self. And when I saw the word self, I saw it as foreign to me. Yeah, or a parasitical movement or foreign pathogen, however you want to image it, as long as it's not you. When I saw it as not me, a possibility became available, which is I can be free from it. Yeah. And then I had a very short synopsis of scanning years of my life. And it's real. I saw that I have been trying to get out of self as self for most of my life. Yeah. So when I saw that self was not me, the possibility of being free from it became available. And then it told me I had been trying to be free as it for quite a long time. Yeah. So that was established and has never not been established. So that happened around 7th year, I think, of sobriety. So now it's 35 years. That's about 28 years ago.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about that. I mean, it begs the question when you say self can't get out of self and that's not you, then what are you? And I wonder if you could go back to the first time you were exposed to this idea of non-duality and, for the benefit of the people in the room who are just getting exposed to this for the first time, how would you describe it to someone who hasn't been exposed to it?
Well, first of all, the only way I could entertain non-duality was being sober. Yeah. If I wasn't sober, there would be a much more important agenda, which would be trying to get out of self. Yeah. As self. So the way of life has brought me a lot of relief and freedom to explore and try to understand other ideas. Yeah. And so I was introduced to this idea of non-duality, I think around 1990 something, 97 or something like that. It sounded incredibly novel, and it fit my experience of recovery, because I truly felt like I recovered from something that was foreign to me. Yeah. And I had already realized I wasn't going to study what I am. I wanted to study what I'm not. Yeah. Which is this idea of self. And I've been going in that direction. And non-duality is in that direction. Non-duality, you don't go to see non-Catholicism or non-Buddhism or non-this or non-that. No, you want Buddhism, you want Catholicism. But this is a very interesting invitation. It's a negation of a condition it's presenting us ourselves to be in, which is a dualistic position. Yeah. So let's say this second you're thinking about you. Yeah. So that you would be an object. Yes. If your head is thinking about you, you're pictured as a body. So that's an object. Yeah. Then the next second you feel like you're the thinking. That would be the subject. This subject-object duality is what non-duality negates. Yeah. So the activity of what I think Paul is negated by non-duality. And then you actually find out what you are by coming to an understanding of what you're not. Yeah. That's how it goes.
Do you think there is something about the purity or the directness of that message of non-duality that makes up for, I hate to say the word gap or a lacking in the 12 steps, in the program of the 12 steps, or do you see it as a natural extension of that?
First of all, I don't think there's a lacking of the program, because the program had a specific target, which was to bring about a sanity concerning the insanity that precedes the first string. Now that has worked wonders for millions of people. Yes. That was its target. Yes. Yeah. So I think what happens in AA is not a closed door room. It's more like an umbrella. A lot of things can be found under the umbrella of recovery, which is extending the information or the invitation that recovery has given us to go other places. Yes. It's not an, I don't see it's either Buddhism or AA. I see there can be Buddhist ideas brought into AA. Yeah. Yeah. So to me, it was a natural growth because I was tasting a sense of freedom. And I felt non-duality actually opened up the last door, yeah, which is this mechanical act that the mental state is in, which is claiming everything that's brought about through conscious contact, yeah? So we are the conscious contact. The head arises after that contact and claims to be a one who's the one who's conscious, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now you're pictured as a physical thing trying to become spiritual. I think that's a bad starting point.
One of the things I really love about you, Paul, is you are an embodiment of take what works and leave what doesn't. And when you just dissect the big book, you do have that ability to make your own calls on some of these things. I liked what you said before about liking to remove the word "my." I have one of my little idiosyncrasies with all of this thing. I wonder if there's perhaps an embedded confusion in the wording of the steps. When they speak of us kind of being separate to God, we're told to pray only for knowledge of God's will for us, which for me seems to presuppose that there is a person, a doer, who is separate from God and must pray to God, rather than God being everything, including the appearance of the doer. So forgive my mental entanglement here, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, they are thoughts, first of all. So I don't have thoughts about that. I have a sense feeling about that, which where the people that were sharing what was happening to them in 39, 35 were obviously handcuffed from their own societal, cultural situation. Yes? Yes. So what was moving them isn't defined how they try to define it. Yeah. It's a living something that's moving us all. Yeah. After a while, I don't, it's sort of, in my sense, it feels like sometimes the head is pharisaical. It knows the letter of the law, but loses the spirit of it. Yeah. So I think language captures us quite a lot, and I feel I just wear it loosely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, of course, in one paragraph it says something incredibly different than the next paragraph. Yeah.
Right.
One paragraph, self is what has defeated us. The next paragraph, you're the source of your own problems. Yes. Or like the idea that you manufacture misery. I do not believe you manufacture misery. I believe we're like a factory here, and we can manufacture a lot of products. And what's going to be manufactured through that factory is based on who's running the factory. Yeah. So if the old employer is running the factory, it loves to produce misery. The new employer produces empathy and compassion and a spirit of service. Yes. I don't think any of those attributes are ours. I think they are expressed through us. Yeah. If something takes you over, you express shit with that flavor. If something else takes you over, you express shit with that flavor. Yes. I don't see any of them to be yours, really.
And the claiming of the experience, it's almost instantaneous, isn't it? When a mosquito lands on my arm and I smack it, fraction of a second later, I'm claiming that experience that I smacked that mosquito. But it was never conceptualized. It was never an idea that I executed.
So the thing is, what conceptualized the claiming of it isn't you. That's the message of non-duality. The message of non-duality isn't revealing shit that's going to make it even more difficult to overcome something. It tells you you're not the one that feels like it's going to be more difficult to overcome something. It relieves you of the sense of being the one that has all these responsibilities or wants to shirk this other shit or doesn't have the ability to do this or da 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 da. It weakens the sense of ownership of all that. And now you're free from the need to be liberated, because that which needs to be liberated is not you. Yes. The unsuspected inner resource does not need to find an inner resource.
The unsuspected.
It is the resource. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple of minutes before
the whole idea of non-duality. So AA makes it very, very clear that something has defeated us, and it's not us. It uses the word self. Yeah. And when it says it in that sentence, being convinced self manifested in various ways is what has defeated us. I do not believe self and us mean the same thing. Yes. So something other than us has defeated us. Now, to me, it seems to be very valuable to realize what has defeated us, so you may be able to recognize it not after its defeat, but before its defeat. Yes? So you now see self, and you see selfing presents false evidence, and the false evidence can only have an effect if it appears real to us. Yeah? Yes. That's the acronym of fear, false evidence appearing real. What's triggering the false evidence to appear real? Not the false evidence, but us, yes? We're the audience. Are your thoughts presented on your forehead to everyone to see? Or doesn't it feel like the head's trying to convince someone there that's not the head? Is playing to an audience somewhere. Yeah. I don't think the audience are bodies. I believe the audience is awareness. Yeah. So the head is presenting a whole narrative to awareness to convince awareness it's the narrative. That's all. That's the bondage of self. Do you break it? No, you see it. I don't lift a fucking finger trying to defeat self as self. I don't. I just see I'm not self.
Got it.
That's where the relief.
I want to turn it over to some questions in a second. So if you have a question for Paul, please raise your hand or post one in the chat.
And it goes over your head, you know. The whole point in recovery is to recover. Follow the program of recovery. And if it leads you somewhere, you'll have a strong enough basis to include the new shit without excluding anything else. Yes. This is the one important thing. When I heard this message, I met so many people who at 10 to 12 years start feeling like there's something that's missing and it's not available in AA. Yeah. So why not go get it and bring it back to AA? You don't have to leave AA.
Paul, I see some people arrive at this juncture with a sense of almost paralysis because the action figure loses its power instantly. And they hear you say, you are not the body, you are not the mind, you are not a doer. And the question arises for them, well, what the fuck am I meant to do now? What's the point of anything, you know? And I've heard you point out some nuggets of wisdom in the big book that can help us cross that divide. You mentioned it earlier, we lose interest in self. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that before we open it up to questions?
Well, first of all, you never lose interest. There's interest does not run out. It doesn't have a finite like bucket where there's only 8 pounds of interest and attention. Yeah, you lose interest in something. Yeah, this mental preoccupation, you lose interest in it. Yeah, that to me is the mistaken name of the spiritual malady. It's a mental malady. The problem resides in the mental activity. Yes, and there's an overburdening and ideation of an idea called self. Yeah, which is reinforced by an activity called selfing all day. Yeah, so we're looking through a self-centered lens, which is we see everything as how it pertains to me, and that me is not you. That's the funny thing. So when the head says it's flipped out, it is. The head is flipped out, but then we mimic it and we claim it to be I'm flipped out. Yeah, when the head is constantly afraid, we say, I'm constantly afraid. Yes? The head has a fucking very valid reason to be constantly afraid because it's not true. Yeah? So it's yapping and and it says resentments are my resentments, and that's correct. But you're not that has the resentments. Self has the resentments. Yeah? So when it tells the truth about itself, we're applying that truth to us. This is the bondage of self.
Beautiful.
The bondage of self is like Stanley is manifesting through Paul. Paul keeps claiming Stanley's manifestations as Paul's manifestations. Paul is in the act of being identified as Stanley. Many of us, the head is in the act of being identified as self. Yeah. To the point where when we try to get out of it, we're trying to get out of it as self. Because the act of being identified doesn't reveal itself to the one who's identified as self. It doesn't. You either got to get whacked or hear about it, or somehow there's got to be a possibility that enters that fucking claustrophobic space of self-centeredness for you to have an idea, hey, I may not be this. Yeah. Hallelujah.